Welcome back. So let's talk just a little bit about some of the key definitions in this article. So one of the main things that they're looking at is they kind of call it this hybridization, right? So there's kind of the endogenous and the exogenous models. So endogenous or endogeneity means something that is internal. Exogenous or exogeneity means something that is external. So what we're looking at in this article is how peasant entrepreneurs in Turkey are struggling with endogenous traditions or traditions within their villages when they are faced with exogenous or threats that come from outside their village, right? And they call it this kind of hybridization, okay? The hybrid between traditional Turkish ways of living versus, or traditional Turkish ways of peasant entrepreneurship, you could even call it, versus these other ways, kind of this globalized entrepreneurial force that's kind of coming and challenging the dominant norms. And they call this a perpetual state of becoming. Now, what does a perpetual state of becoming even mean, right? This perpetual state of becoming means that you are always changing, growing, or moving. Those of you that follow process theory, you should check out some of my videos on Mary Parker Fall, Alfred North Whitehead, etc. For more discussion of becoming, or my video on the differentiated relational ontology. That's another good place to look at becoming. But what it means is that this idea, this understanding of peasant entrepreneurship is not fixed. Entrepreneurs are always changing and adapting to new circumstances, and that's what they mean by this perpetual state of becoming. Now, they talk about one of the problems with these kind of post-colonial models is they always make a very clear distinction between traditional and new, endogenous and exogenous. But they're saying there's a hybrid state, kind of this third space, almost a heterotopia or heterotopic space, where there's this tension between tradition and modern. And that creates this extra space, this tension. And that's what we're talking about here in this peasant entrepreneurship in Turkey. It's not exactly traditional Turkish entrepreneurship or peasant entrepreneurship. It's not exactly kind of an international globalized form of entrepreneurship. It's something in between. And this perpetual tension between old and new is what relates to this becoming. So it's always kind of changing, flowing, and moving. Now, they give some interesting examples. Probably you're wondering, well, what is a peasant anyhow, right? I mean, you probably played computer games or something, and you think about peasants as maybe farmers or something like that. But they give a definition on page 930, right? And so they say, for this reason, they say that Johnson, 2004, argues that urbanization and economic diversification are not leading to the disappearance of the peasantry, but rather its redefinition. That's what we're going to talk about in this article. For this reason, attempting to define peasant would seem inappropriate because of the essentialist and fixing tendencies of definitions. However, Johnson does argue that what defines a peasant form of production is a logic of subsistence and also the maintenance of some control over the means of production. And they go on to say that peasants don't always permanently cut ties. So what they're saying is that if you're a peasant, you're probably kind of in a rural area, you're probably doing something with agriculture. You probably maintain some control over means of production, like maybe you own land or maybe you own some equipment or something like that. So that's how we're defining peasant in this particular article. And what they mean by social redefinition of the peasant is that, a peasant in modern day Turkey is not the same thing as a peasant in, 12th century England, right? And that's the whole point of this article with peasant entrepreneurship, how peasants are redefining their image in kind of a global context. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, as they talk about this peasant moral economy on page 930. Because the peasants always insist on some sort of a, how should I put it? And I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But this peasant moral economy is basically the struggle of people in the villages to remain equal at all costs. In other words, they operate according to a very medieval way of understanding wealth in the world. Where, in the West we normally think of economies as growing and the amount of wealth is growing. A lot of these people in this peasant moral economy understand that wealth is something very fixed. Those of you that watch my discussions on Porterian view of strategy on my channel are familiar with this concept. So it's like a zero-sum game. So there's only this much pie in the world, and if I take a slice of pie that's a little bit bigger, then that by definition means that somebody else does not get some pie. Because I get richer, therefore by definition somebody else loses out. So there's this continuous struggle to remain equal. You will actually go out of your way to make sure that somebody doesn't get some sort of an advantage. And by the way, this was the way that wealth was understood in the Middle Ages, particularly in Europe, because they didn't understand that economies can grow. Quality of life can grow over time. There was no idea that just because I get more, it doesn't, a piece of pie can be growing and therefore I can have more. It doesn't mean that I'm getting richer because I'm taking away from somebody else, right? So that's kind of the concept that we're looking at with this peasant moral economy. Now what's interesting in this peasant entrepreneurship in this article is they all focus on also having a subsistence fallback, which makes it kind of like prosaic entrepreneurship. So in other words, we're going to look at some peasant entrepreneurs who own like almost like Airbnb or bed and breakfast things. They call them pensions in the article. So while they're entertaining tourists, they also are still tied to the land. Maybe they're farming, maybe they have a garden, or maybe they're also engaging in some traditional forms of work while also engaging in this kind of new thing with tourism entrepreneurship, and then also getting balloon commissions, right? So that's kind of where this tension comes from. But that's why these peasants are unique. They have this subsistence fallback. So I think that wraps up what I've got in this video. In the next video, we will briefly talk about the methodology, the longitudinal ethnography. As always, give me a thumbs up if you like the video, subscribe, and make sure you comment down below. I'll see you next time.